Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Scrutiny Committee. Yeah, I should have learnt it by now. On 28th of October. Just a few bits of housekeeping. Please have your phones to silent, and in the event of an alarm, please go to the door there. This meeting will be webcast and will be broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. So we'll move to the agenda and apologies. I believe we have 3 apologies. Councillors Walsh, Euston and Walters. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman, that's correct, and all other members are present this evening. Thank you.
And we are quorate.
We are, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Point number 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest to make, referring to the agenda tonight? No? Thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting on the 22nd of July 2021. I'm assuming that everyone's read them. Are there any comments, any corrections? I did start to write down what it was so we could remind ourselves, but it's such a long list I gave up. The Manor Street Audit Progress Report, Key Financial Indicators, Internal Audit Updates Reports, Charter, Outcome of the Housing Benefit Subsidy Certification Work, Review and Update of Council Strategic Risk Register, Treasury Management Report, Annual Report for 2021, Local Code of Corporate Governance and Annual Governance Statement 2020-2021. If members are in agreement, I'll...
Move them as a correct record, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, you do require a seconder before going to the call for vote. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Sorry, is that Councillor Mann seconding? Sorry,
Councillor
apologies,
Johnson.
Councillor Johnson seconding the minutes as an accurate record. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, moving along. Public question time. We understand we have no speakers tonight, so we'll go straight into the meat of the meeting. Point 5, key financial indicators. Phil Myers to present, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So this is the report on the key financial indicators at the end of September of the current year, which are set out in Appendix A to the actual report. In terms of brief commentary, in terms of the budget position for the year, for the position at the end of September, we were just slightly shy of the profiled budget, positively by £15,000. We continue to submit assessments to government in terms of the impact of COVID, and the latest assessment of that was submitted on the 24th of September, and that was showing that we were still incurring additional costs, but also as well suffering areas where we were having reduced income. Positive side is that we have got some funding streams that are able to meet those pressures. So we had money from the National Leisure Recovery Fund, which we submitted a claim in 2021 for, and we had a balance of that left over, which has been carried over. So that's been used to partly fund the support to our leisure operator. Government made available as well, as part of the local government finance settlement, further emergency funding of £686,000. And we also received some funding through the contain outbreak funding pot of £177,000. And we've recently submitted a claim for losses of sales fees and charges for the period April to June, and that was submitted on the 22nd of October. So we continue to monitor the position regarding our spending and the impact of COVID, and we will have a refresh of that position when we report the second quarter financial performance and the projected outturn for the year as part of the corporate quarterly performance report that will go to Cabinet on the 29th of November. In terms of salaries paid to staff, again, a positive variance there at the end of September of just over £100,000. And that was after allowing for half of the efficiency factor. So the budget allows £300,000 as an efficiency factor, which traditionally we achieve through churn in terms of our staffing costs. So half of that has been accommodated in this first half year. The rental income from commercial properties seem to be holding up pretty well. So again, a slightly positive variance there in terms of the rents invoiced at the end of September against what we were expecting. Majority of units are occupied. So you had 6 vacant units at the end of the period, but 3 of those were actually new units that recently became available due to some reconfiguration of the space at the Braintree Enterprise Centre, which has converted the conference facilities there, as that will now be, those facilities will now be part of the new iConstruct Centre. So of those 6, 4 are pending legal completion. In terms of capital programme, so we've got an extensive capital programme for this year, nearly £38 million that we're expecting to spend, and no surprise on the projects that are covered there: Manor Street, the Enterprise Centre at Horizon, the infrastructure works at Horizon, iConstruct, and then the town centre pedestrianisation. So at the end of September, almost about just over 41% of that budget had been spent, £15.5 million. At the last committee, members asked to receive information on capital receipts. So I've included information in here for this report. So the capital resources plan for 21-22 assumed that we would generate around £17.5 million of capital receipts, and those would come in from a variety of sources, which are listed out in the report there. And at the end of September, the amount we'd actually accrued is just over 17 million. So pretty good sort of performance against what we were expecting there for the year. In terms of local taxes, so the council tax, we continued collecting council tax rate is just shy of what the rate was last year. So 57.48% collected at the end of September against 57.63% last year. We're still also slightly behind pre-pandemic levels in terms of collection. Business rates, collection rates here are a little bit funny because the collection rate has been impacted really by the retail and nursery rate relief, which has been granted for 21-22. So for the first 3 months of the year, a lot of businesses have no business rates to pay, and then we had to rebill those businesses to reflect the reduction in that retail relief down to 66%. So it has sort of pushed back some of the sort of payment plans that would typically have been in place, and that's been reflected in the performance rate. Having said that, I think it's quite pleasing to note, not actually in the report, but at the end of August, we did pick up information from across authorities in Essex, and our rates on both council tax and business rates were the highest of those that were being reported. So we are doing well compared to our peers in that sense. The report provides details around write-offs on business rates and council tax. The amounts involved are very small. We typically don't write off much debt at all historically, so the amounts are very often quite small amounts, given the number of write-offs as well that are being made. In terms of the sundry debts, so this is money owed to the council other than council tax and business rates, 2.7 million outstanding at the end of September. But again, as is normal with this, over half of that is related to housing benefit overpayments, where there are a whole range of payment plans that are in place to collect monies which are limited in terms of regulations as to how much we can collect from a debtor. The proportion of supplier payments is down really on where we would like to be, and certainly in terms of the comparative figure for last year. We are introducing quite significant change in terms of our purchase order and payment system. So we're now integrating two systems, and that's inevitably going to take some time to embed across the organisation, as it does require services to operate in a different way from what they've been used to. And then the returns on investments, as expected, short-term investments pretty much yielding very little, given the low interest rate environment. But pleasingly, the dividends on our pooled funds continued to provide a positive return of nearly 4% here, 3.88%. That's actually slightly lower than it was at the time of this report. There were two dividends that we were still waiting information on, which we've now received. So actually the performance at the end of September is actually slightly better than is reported here. And the pooled funds have a positive valuation, so that they're of 2.288 million, which is an unrealised surplus at the end of September. So there's further detail on the Treasury management in the Appendix B to the report. But happy to take members' questions.
Councillor Mann.
You mentioned the salaries underspend as compared to profile. Presumably that's because we're carrying vacancies. Are any of them particularly significant?
Yes, you're right. We have got vacancies across the area in multiple service areas. We've also had churn on some posts. As you know, there's been people retiring and leaving, and also we've then had replacements coming in. I'm not aware of any issues as a result of that. It does seem sort of part of normal business, really.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? I'd just like to, congratulate, as normal, the team for its good work, and I think it's very gratifying on all levels that the good news on rental income holding up rental, the number of properties occupied, council tax, payment rates. It's gratifying both in terms of the fund we get in and the fact that it's not total chaos out there. So let's be pleased with that. I don't have any other further points. Thank you for including the capital receipts. I think that's useful, and as I've said before, it does us good to see that some coming in rather than just going out. So thank you very much. Councillor White.
Just brief observation pertaining to yesterday's budget and details that were provided by the Chancellor. Have we looked into any forward questions about business rates, where certain businesses are going to be given quite a moratorium, especially in the hospitality sector? Do we understand how any impact that may have on the council?
So the usual position, and this was certainly the case set out in the spending review. So where government are providing relief to businesses, they do then compensate local authorities for the loss of that business rate income through separate grants. So that's generally been the case throughout where they've made those sort of decisions.
Thank you, Phil. If there are no further questions, I think we're asked to accept the report of the key financial indicators as of the 30th of September 2021.
Move we do that, Chair.
Agenda item 6, internal audit update, including progress against 2021 /22 internal audit plan by Angie Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this is a summary of the progress against the internal audit plan. Paragraph 3.1.2 notes the audits that have been completed since the last report to this committee in July. My apologies for the change of terminology on the payroll shared service for substantial, please read significant. So you've got the list of audits completed there, and in Appendix 2 it details the outcomes of those audits in a little more detail. Since the report was completed for this committee, an additional audit has been completed in respect of information management. It was noted in Appendix 1 as near completion, so that has now been completed, also with a significant assurance outcome, and the detail will be presented to this committee at the next meeting. Paragraph 3.1.3 refers to factors impacting on the completion of planned work, and within that is noted the time spent on insurance work and an unexpected tender following a complete tender of insurances last year. We went to tender again on 3 areas of insurance this year. Paragraph 3.2 confirms that there have been no RIPA or IPA applications in 2021 to the date of producing this report, and also since producing the report. And Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, members? Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to the Disabled Facilities Grant, one of the recommendations was work with procurement to introduce procurement for housing framework, particularly for stair lifts, to confirm fair contract award and value for money. Is that an indication there's been some question about whether the stair lifts provision has been given value for money?
I think it's more a case of ensuring there's appropriate competition in the process. But this is noted that management responses are in the process of being determined, so we'll give further update at the next meeting.
Any further questions, colleagues? No? As I normally do, Andrew, just ask the usual question: are you able to cope with your workload, particularly in view of the extra responsibilities that you and your team have taken on?
Thank you, Chair. It is challenging. We do have 2 full-time auditors who are dedicated to completing the work in the audit plan, including one trainee auditor who is progressing extremely well with his chartered internal auditor qualification. He has now just one more exam to sit before becoming fully qualified. So I'm happy there's the competence in the team for most work.
Good, thank you very much. If there are no further questions or points, the recommendation is to note the progress and performance against the 2021-22 internal audit plan. Thank you very much, Angela. We move to item number 7, and I was remiss in not welcoming Steve Bladen, who's with us tonight from BDO. Thank you very much for coming out. You're going to discuss the external audit plan for the coming financial year.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So, yes, the first paper before you this evening from us is our 2021 Audit Planning Report. Probably the first thing I should say, actually, is I'm not Aphrodite, whose photo you will have seen on the first few pages. So anyone who's been on this committee for a while will know that Aphrodite was the BDO director for the Braintree audit up until she went on maternity leave in early 2020, and I took over that audit for the period that she was on maternity leave. But Aphrodite is now back, and she will take over the audit from me going forwards. So the paper, as I say, it's our 2021 Audit Planning Report. It sets out the significant risks that we've identified in terms of our 2021 audit of the Council's financial statements and the work that we will do to then address those risks. So they're set out in detail from page 12 onwards. And there's 4 of those, and they're very similar to the risks that we identified in previous years, and which you'll have seen in other papers from us. And I think it's also worth saying that they're very similar to what the sort of risks that we would identify for any local government body of Braintree's size and the nature of the services that it provides. And there's a couple of those risks there. So in particular, risk of fraud or risk of management override and risk of fraud in revenue recognition. They're essentially risks that are mandated by auditing standards. They are rebuttable, but we don't tend to rebut them, so that we've included those risks in our audit plans. It's not because we're expecting to see any fraud in revenue recognition or for management to override controls and present the council in a more favourable financial position. They're just risks that we recognise that they do exist, and we will do testing to address those. The plan also covers our value for money conclusion. So what we've done is we've highlighted on page 15 that there's been a fairly significant change to the way that we will undertake that work this year, and in the way that we will report that. So that's as a result of the change in the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice. And the report that you get from us once we've completed that work will be much more detailed. Instead of just setting out where we think something may have gone wrong, it will set out in much more detail about what the council's arrangements are for things like financial management, governance and partnership working. At this stage, we've not identified any risks of significant weaknesses, but if we do identify any as we go through our audit, we'll come back to this committee and update members on that. Other things that we've set out in the plan is just to confirm our independence, and we feel we are independent from the council. And there's other areas that set out our responsibilities in terms of estimates, going concern and fraud, and you'll see as you go through the plan that those responsibilities are set out in more detail. But I'm happy to take any questions on the content of that plan.
Members, any questions or comments?
Well, just a comment, Chair. I mean, it's good to know that, in your opinion, we're only sort of facing the full standard risks that would be appropriate to a district council of our size, and that there's nothing lurking there that you think is otherwise significant at this stage. So that's sort of, Chairman, reassuring to hear.
Just like to make a couple of points. For this year, everything comes back to money. We put an additional audit fee of £29,000, which is sort of another 60% or so. Can you just briefly give us a rationale for this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So if I look at the fees for 2019-20, where we've proposed an additional, at this stage, £29,000, approximately half of that relates to the work that we've done on value for money conclusion, and the other half relates to the work that we do around things like valuation of property, plant and equipment, investment property assets, pension liabilities. The work that auditors are expected to do in those kinds of areas has increased in recent years. So the amount of challenge that we undertake of valuers, the testing of the assumptions that goes into making those valuation judgments, and the amount of supporting documentation that we look at in relation to those has increased significantly. So we have proposed an additional audit fee for that in 1920. I think it's fair to say that what we would like to do is agree that with the council. We're not always able to do that because obviously the council will have its own view on the amount of time and effort that takes. There's no problem with that. What we simply do is we report that to PSAA Limited, and ultimately it's PSAA Limited who have responsibility for reviewing what we've submitted, taking on board the comments, the council's own comments and views on that, and they will determine a fee in due course. They do also review our working papers as well to validate that we have done what we have said we've done. Perhaps if I just go into 2021 as well, I think that valuation work does take place. It does, particularly on investment property assets, which are valued every year. That work does take place every year, so we would see some of that as a recurring fee going forwards. We're not yet in a position to quantify that, but we will do in due course. And I think it's also worth saying that in terms of the value for money work that we will undertake, There is an expectation that the more detail that we are required to go into by the new code will lead to an increase in audit fees. And PSAA did publish a document probably about a month or so ago now, where they set out how they saw that those fees would land, or those additional fees would land. And for a district council such as Braintree, I think I'm correct in saying it was around 10 to 20% of the existing scale fee. So in Braintree's, in terms of Braintree's scale fee, that would be around 4,000 to 8,000, give or take, a little bit here and there. But as I say, we're not yet in a position to be able to quantify that for 2021. But as soon as we are, we'll come back to the council with firm proposals for that.
Thank you for explaining that, Mr. Bladen. Can I just ask another question? On your page 17, then, other matters requiring further discussion. On the bottom of the left, it says contingencies. We request input from the Governance and Audit Scrutiny Committee on recent claims. Could you explain what is expected here? First of all, what it means by contingencies, and what claims are we talking about?
So we're talking about significant claims against the council. So if members are aware of any kind of legal action that the council's involved in that is likely to result in a significant claim, financial claim against the council, we would ask that that's brought to our attention by members. If you're not aware of anything, then obviously there's nothing for you to.
No, just the way it was worded, it sounded as if something had happened we weren't aware of. All right, thank you. You've also on your page 25, we request feedback from you on our planning and completion report. I'm assuming that this, you're really referring to officers here, I guess, more than anything else.
If members have got any comments to make around the risks that we've identified, or even just the format of it, then we're very happy to take those.
Right, well, those are all the points that I had. Sorry, do you wave your hand, Councillor Ben? No. So thank you very much. You can move on to agenda item 8, approving the statement of accounts for the financial year 2019 and 2020, which also includes the audit completion report. That's Phil Mark.
Yes, so if that's okay, Chair, so I think this has been sort of done in two parts. So I just introduced the item, and then I think if that's okay, then Steve Bladen from BDO will then pick up their completion report. So basically, this is just to try and to sort of bring now sort of some conclusion to the 2019-20 audit. So we drafted our statement of accounts back in June, which Chris Fleeton was Corporate Director and Section 151 Officer signed off. We had a period of public inspection, and as in previous years, we had no request to receive or inspect the accounts. We then issued a revised statement of accounts at the end of November, which was the revised statutory sort of publication date that was introduced by regulations, accepting that councils and auditors would be impacted by the pandemic. As the accounts were not audited at that stage, we were then also required to publish a statement to that effect, which is what we did. And then we had the audit start on the accounts officially in July, and the sort of conclusion on on that work is what is then contained in the audit completion report, which is appended to this report. And if I pause there and if that's okay with you, Chair, let's Steve Bladen take over from there.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Phil, as well. So the detailed paper that you have before you tonight is our 1920 audit completion report. Appreciate it's a fairly detailed report. What I'll do is I'll try and pull out the key elements for you. But what it does is it summarises the results from our 2019-20 audit, and it covers both our work on the Council's financial statements and the work that we've done to give a value for money conclusion. In terms of our work on the financial statements, our view is that an unqualified audit opinion is appropriate. What we will do is we will include in our auditor's report an emphasis of matter paragraph, and what that will do is it will refer to some of the uncertainties around asset valuations that existed at the 31st of March 2020. But all our paragraph does is it just references the disclosures that have already been made by the Council in its financial statements. And just to reiterate, this is not a qualification of our audit opinion at all. It's something that all auditors were doing or doing within audit reports on financial statements relating to that period. In terms of some of the detail, so on pages 11 to 20 of the report, we've set out how we dealt with each of the significant risks we identified at the audit planning stage of our audit. And as I've already said, those risks were very similar to the ones that you've seen in the 2020-21 audit planning report. Apart from the matter that I've already referenced regarding asset valuations, we don't have any significant matters to bring to your attention. We did identify a very small number of audit differences that management have not amended the financial statements for. We think the impact of those is very small, and they don't have a significant, even if they were corrected, they wouldn't have a significant impact on the Council's financial statements or indeed our audit reports, but we do bring those to you just for your attention. On pages 28 to 29, we've included details of the changes that management have made as we've gone through the audit. Again, we do not consider those to be significant, and none of those amendments have impacted upon the Council's general fund balances. If perhaps I then move on to the Council's value for money arrangements. So there we did identify two significant risks at the planning stage of our audit. So the first of those was around how the Council manages its financial position, and the second is around how it manages significant projects, given that there was a number of those going on in the Council at that time, particularly the Manor Street development and the Horizon 120 project. So in respect of the former risk, we have nothing to bring to you, or no significant findings to bring to your attention. So we think the Council's responded well to the challenges posed by the COVID pandemic around the financial risks that led to. And given the level of reserves that are held by the Council and the arrangements it has in place for managing its financial position, as I say, we don't have anything significant to bring to your attention. In respect of how the Council manages significant projects, we have reflected on the report that members considered at the last meeting in relation to the Manor Street project, and in particular the Elucidate report that was made available to members, I believe, at a previous meeting. And we looked in particular at the way that the contractor was engaged to provide support to the Council around estimating the cost of that project, and the way that contractor was appointed. Members will be aware that the the report that came to the last meeting identified a number of weaknesses there, and because of those we will be qualifying our value for money conclusion in respect of that. I think given the kind of extensive discussion there was at the last meeting around this issue, I wasn't proposing to go through all of that again in detail, but as I say, it was around the way that contractor was engaged, and the kind of significant difference that arose between that original cost estimate and the final cost of that programme. I think what I do want to reflect, though, is that the Council has responded very positively to those issues, and as at the risk of repeating myself, members will have seen that at the last meeting. But not just that report, in terms of commissioning that report from Elucidate to highlight what those issues were. So we think the Council's responded very positively to that. We won't be taking any further action in relation to that. But unfortunately, we do have to report on the arrangements that were in place at the time. So we will be qualifying our value for money conclusion in respect of that. Just a couple of other things I wanted to put out. So we have set out on page 41 the change in audit fees. I won't repeat what I said in response to the Chair's last question around those, but we will be going through that process to vary those. On page 40, we've reconfirmed our independence to you. On page 46, we did set out a couple of areas that were outstanding. One of those was around the governance statement. We have seen the revisions to that governance statement, and we're happy that those reflect the weaknesses that existed around that project management. So to all intents and purposes, that line of our report could now be deleted. What we do have to do, though, is we do just have a couple of final reviews to go through before we can issue our final auditor's report. We expect to complete those over the next couple of weeks. I don't expect there to be any further changes to the financial statements as a result of those. But what we would like to request is that the Chair be given delegated authority in consultation with Section 151 Officer and Phil Myers, that if anything else did come out of that work, we could agree any changes to the financial statements with those three individuals. Obviously, if there is anything significant that came out of that, then we would bring a further report back to this committee. Appreciate that's a relatively quick canter through a very detailed report, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bladen. No, very, very concise and well put across to us. Ladies and gentlemen, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. A very measured and fair report. I mean, it's good that we have nothing really generally to overexcite ourselves about a report like this, but I must sort of agree with your findings about the Manor Street project and the qualification of value for money. I think that is a fair point, because I think we accepted at our last meeting that things did go wrong there, which reflected the cost of the project. So I don't think we can do anything but accept that. But happy that Manor Street is in a sense a one-off. It's done, it's dusted, and as you say, the authority has responded sort of well to the various reports that outline possible shortcomings. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other points that members would like to make? No? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve. You've made, made significant mention of the Manor Street developments, quite rightly so. And I don't want to go over old ground again, but I'm a little less than happy as to how we can ensure that this does not happen again, because I've followed the progress of this right from the very beginning, and I think there were some shortcomings. How do we, or can we, ensure that something like this doesn't happen? Because we've got quite a few projects coming up, some significant projects which require a considerable amount of management and expertise, and how or can we ensure that we're all on the right track all the time? You know, it's a question of reporting back, etc. We know all the things that have got to be done, but I found it very worrying at the time, and still do to a certain degree. But I don't want to make a great thing of it, but my comments.
I think the key thing is the response to the points that were made by Elucidate in their report were very clearly set out, and the council's response to those and how the processes it will put in place to address those weaknesses were clearly set out in the report that came to the last meeting. So I think as long as those processes are followed, I think they will help to kind of address many of those weaknesses and issues that arose. And I think the one that I mean, Chris or Phil might want to say something more, but I think the key one that struck me was around the kind of additional sign-offs of where you're using contractors to support the council in those processes, the additional sign-offs that there were there, but also the gateway process as well that's been put in place to kind of review each project at key stages. I thought they were the key ones to make sure that you're following.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm reasonably happy, thank you.
I think from my point of view, we've also taken on board some very professional people now, which perhaps was part of the issue. There was maybe a lot of there were things which were kind of a bit overwhelming perhaps sometimes, and so we now move with some big projects, and they seem to be going quite well. So, thank you. I had a couple of points, if I may. We were speaking about Manor Street, Mr. Bladen. It seemed to those of us sort of on the outside that the process of dealing with this took a very long time. Is there any particular reason? I mean, and this has contributed perhaps to the length of 17 months that it's taken to do this audit, which is still not signed off. Would you care to comment on that?
So I think there were the two areas that I think contributed to the delay, and I guess you're talking about the delay in our reporting, Chair, are you? Yes. Yeah. So the two key areas that really contributed to that were, firstly, we wanted to see how the council had responded to those issues, and so seeing the Elucidate report, which I appreciate was some time ago, but also the reporting of that through this committee back in July was helpful in terms of enabling us to reach that conclusion. The second area that did take a reasonable amount of time to get, we did want to get our own legal advice as well, in terms of whether or not the council had followed or met all of its legal responsibilities in terms of appointing that contractor that's mentioned in the Elucidate report, and that we appreciate that the council's monitoring officer would have given the council advice on that, but as an independent external auditor, we wanted to get our own advice on that as well, and that did take a fair amount of time and did contribute to some of those delays. So that's the key reasons, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Could I just ask about valuation? This is a point. One of the kind of could do better areas. Is it generally some, with other authorities that you audit? Do you have the same kind of issues?
So in terms of the amount of work that we have to do, yes, we are finding that we are having similar issues across authorities. So more and more authorities are acquiring more and more investment property, for example, to help generate revenue, or just for capital appreciation. So those properties have to be valued every year. And we are seeing that the amount of, as I said earlier, the amount of work that we're required to do to give an opinion on those valuations is increasing.
I actually meant the fact that there were some changes to valuations, as I understand it. Yeah.
So valuations do change every year. A valuer will look at something and they will change. They will give a slightly different opinion on the valuation of that asset every year, either increase or decrease depending on the market conditions at that point in time.
Sure. But haven't you suggested that some of the ones done on our properties were not quite done as they should be?
Oh, so there was a small number of issues that we identified and we've picked up on in the report. I wouldn't see those as being particularly significant issues, and I think it's fair to say that as we do most councils' audits, that given the amount of or the number of valuations that are taking place, and the fact that we do go into quite a lot of detail in terms of looking at the support for those valuations, we do generally find one or two things. So I wouldn't pick out Braintree as being particularly worse than any other council in that respect.
That's good.
In fact, I would say that the issues we found are probably smaller than we find at others.
Good, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. Just looking at your overview here, and it's pleasing to see that, I quote, in all significant respects, the audited body had proper arrangements to ensure it took properly informed decisions and deployed resources to achieve planned and sustainable outcomes for taxpayers and local people. So that's very, very pleasing to have finally got here, and thank you for that. Are there any other points that members would like to raise concerning the audit? No. So thank you very much again, Ms. Blade, for that, and to your team for their work. And you've started. You've started the next one now, have you?
We've started the planning for it.
Started the planning for it. Yes. Okay. Right. So we have to. Excuse me. I just have to refer back to here. Recommendations then, members, to receive and note the external auditor's audit completion report on the 2019-20 accounts. Secondly, to approve certification of the letter of representation by the corporate director, finance. I assume that means that the corporate director can sign it, yes. Point 3, to approve the Council's statement of accounts for the financial year 2019-20, subject to any changes that may be necessary once the audits have been completed. and a final audit completion report has been issued. And fourthly, to delegate to the Chair of the Governance and Audit Scrutiny Committee to approve any final changes to the published audited Statement of Accounts 2019-20. Do members agree?
Sorry, Phil.
Yeah, I was just going to. I think just based on comments that Steve made, I think he suggested maybe that last one is in consultation with the Section 151 officer or corporate director. So, yes. So I think we would just amend it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, with that amendment, are members in agreement that we...
Chairman, you do need to formally move and second those recommendations, please.
One by one?
Chairman, you can take all four together if members wish to do it that way, but you do need to move and second them, please.
If you're happy, members, that we take them all at one, as I've read them through, do I have a proposer? Councillor White, and a seconder, Councillor Johnson. Thank you very much.
Chairman, you still need to put it to a vote, please. You've
Okay.
only got the authority to put the matter to the vote. The matter still needs to be voted upon. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, to call a lawful vote, you need to ask for a mover and a seconder, a proposer and a seconder. Once you have those, you may put the matter to a vote, and then members need to indicate whether they are for or against the recommendations or abstaining. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Wise words as always. Can I have a proposer? Councillor White, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Santamaro.
You had Councillor Johnson, who had formally seconded the...
Fine.
So, Chairman, you just need now to ask all members to show if they're in favour of approving the recommendations, please.
Are you in favour of... Thank you.
Chairman, that is unanimous. Apologies for interfering. Thank you.
We come to the Treasury Management Mid-Year Report with Phil to present, please.
So, the mid-year report is appended to the covering report. It takes a familiar, probably, approach to previous reports that the committee will have received. So, there's an economic background which has probably been pretty much superseded now by the information and data that came out yesterday in terms of the budget and spending review. Nevertheless, I think the report there just highlighted some of the concerns around the inflationary pressures that were being seen, and the fact that the Monetary Policy Committee that set policy rates for the UK was starting to become a little bit more sort of minded to think that there could be some changes afoot going forward. In terms of the financial markets, a bit up and down during the course of the period, but nevertheless, the equity markets seem to have performed pretty well, and we see that in terms of the valuation of some of the council's pooled funds. But we do see some indications of potential expectations in rises in interest rates in things such as the gilt yields, which, despite declining during the course of the period, then started to climb towards the end of September. In terms of credit position, I think the situation seems pretty positive in terms of the vaccine rollout. Seems to be pretty good for the economic outlook, and that's reflected in the sort of position regarding the banks. And that's led Arlen Close, the council's Treasury advisors, to change some of their advice. So we were previously working to a 35-day limit, and they've been comfortable to extend that to 100 days. Still pretty short in terms of investment horizon. The local local context is then set out in section 3 on page 126. There's a table there that really just shows the starting position. We had borrowing of £6 million at the start of the year, and there's been no change in that borrowing in the 6-month period. In terms of investments, we started with just over £38 million. There we have seen an increase, which is not untypical at this time of the year. Our investment cash balances do tend to rise in the first half of the year, and then we would expect those to reduce in the second half. In terms of borrowing update, I've just made mention there to changes. There were some changes in November 2020 around PWLB lending policy, and there's which was really around local authorities being prevented from borrowing from PWLB if they had acquisition of investment assets for yield in their capital programmes. So this is just on the back of concerns that have been expressed in government about some of the activity of a small number of local authorities, but it does now seem to be feeding through in terms of arrangements for all local authorities now. So HM Treasury, they've issued some further guidance just clarifying some of the definitions around what they consider investment assets for yield, and they've also made some changes to some of the practical arrangements in terms of lending, in terms of the borrowing from PWLB, extending the number of days that a loan will be settled in after being agreed. In terms of our existing borrowing, the £6 million is a LOBO debt, lender's option, borrower's option, which we've had for some years now and still has some years to mature. We do keep under review the opportunity for potentially repaying that or restructuring that debt, and we're currently going through that process at the moment with our Treasury advisors as to whether there is an opportunity at the moment. Part of that would be around risk management, because there are inherent risks with the LOBO, given that the options tend to be in the favour of the lender, but also potential some financial savings also through reducing the cost of debt. Section 5 then deals with Treasury investment activity, and you can see there we've average invested over the period of just nearly £56 million, but did peak at £73 million. Some of that because of the funding that we received early in the year around business grant funding that we were passporting through, not at the same levels as we saw in the previous year. We can see there the movements in terms of our investment categories, and you can see that the majority of the activity has been in actual fact, with the Debt Management Office, which is part of the UK government, and also in our money market funds. And that's really partly because the level of interest that's available from across the market it doesn't really is not really sufficient to drive us to any other sort of safer havens than Debt Management Office and money market, which are quite low risk counterparties. As I said, so at the end of September we had just over £68 million invested, but we do expect that amount to reduce over the second half of the financial year. The actual interest that we've generated, as was mentioned earlier, pretty low on our short-term investments at just 0.03%, but on our pooled funds, as I said, here we had 3.88% or £369,000, with the 2 dividends that were not declared at the time of doing this report. Now we've received that information, that actual return at the half-year stage is just over 4% at 4.45%. Would expect that to moderate over the second half of the year, as the dividends are not equally spread across the financial year. And again, as I mentioned earlier, valuation of our pooled funds is positive, so nearly £2.29 million above the £19 million that we had invested in those funds. There's the table under paragraph 5.9, which is on page 129. There is a table there on benchmarking, which just shows our position and shows the position for the sort of previous quarters, but also in comparison with other similar local authorities and clients. And these are clients of Arling Close, our Treasury advisors. So the table shows that we benchmark pretty well. I will just point out there is actually an error in that table. So where it says income return all clients 3.65%, that should actually read 0.78%, and the 3.65% should actually be in the total return under similar LAs, where it says 3.93%. So I'll make sure that those changes are made before the report goes further. But that does show that our income return is pretty good compared with similar LAs, but also all clients of Arling Close. And our total return is particularly good, and that's a lot of that is obviously the pooled fund investments that we've got. In terms of compliance, we set out some limits and restrictions in terms of how much we could borrow and how much we can invest in various places, and those limits have all been complied with. We've not increased our borrowing, so we're not anywhere near the sort of limits of our borrowing at the present time. I've also listed in there some other developments. Again, this theme of local authorities that have been seen to be borrowing money to invest. So SITFA have been developing 2 of their codes that we have to have regard to, the Prudential Code and the Treasury Management Code. So they did some consultation on that previously, and they have now just issued some revised codes and guidance notes, but again in draft form and subject to further consultation. So the key points that they're trying to sort of draw out there is, in their view, local authorities should not be borrowing to invest, primarily for financial return, and should really only be borrowing for functions of the authority. They make reference to categorising investments, so being clear about what are treasury management investments or investments for service purposes, where they might be supporting various objectives that are aligned with the councils, or whether they are for commercial purposes. Also defining acceptable reasons to borrow, and they've set out various scenarios where they think it is acceptable or appropriate for local authorities to borrow. For service and commercial investments, they've made reference to not only those being affordable and prudent, but also the having an assessment or an eye to proportionality, and making sure that if authorities are going to undertake such investments, that those investments they can afford the sort of downside to those investments, and it's not disproportionate to the council's budgets. And I think that's probably got some particular authorities in mind that have done some very extreme investments over the years. Prudential indicator, they're also talking about introducing some new prudential indicators around the income stream that authorities generate from investments, and also the inclusion of something that is referred to as the liability benchmark, which is a measure of what a council's borrowing needs might be based on its capital plans, but also the level of reserves and balances that it might hold over the medium long term. There's also a reference to considering environmental, social and governance issues in the risk management of Treasury management. And finally, another theme that sort of continues is this additional focus on knowledge and skills of officers and members who are involved in decision making, recognising that some of these arrangements can be quite complex and challenging. So the consultation on that finishes on the 16th of November. Also, the former Ministry for Housing and Housing Communities and Local Government, they've also been issuing policy papers around what local authorities are doing, and they've highlighted a number of areas where they may seek to introduce further measures. And this is around things like, again, governance and training, even mention of potential statutory caps on borrowing, regulations around minimum revenue provision, which is essentially the financial provision that councils have to make to repay any borrowing that they undertake, and also ensuring that whilst CIFRA and PWB issue guidance, that maybe those should have some statutory sort of force behind those, rather than just authorities just being minded to have regard to them and then decide what they want to do. And I think just finally, just the outlook is included again, really which just touches on the point about the fact that there is this expectation of some movements in interest rates. Arlene Close's view at the moment is that the markets are perhaps pricing in higher rates than perhaps they would think is necessary, but that we will wait and see. Happy to take any questions. Chair.
Thank you. Phil? Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. Central government has never been keen, as you've indicated, on sort of councils using taxpayers' money to play the market for financial gain. But it's usually been considered legitimate for councils to invest in projects like sort of Manor Street and Horizon 120 to sort of achieve an income stream. Have you detected any shift in government thinking on schemes like that, or are they still considered to be legitimate?
Yes, so the guidance that they've issued in terms of the PWB lending policy still covers a bracket, what they call regeneration type projects. So if it's bringing about economic benefits to an area, then yes, they're quite happy to continue to lend to those sort of schemes, even accepting that aspects of that sort of scheme might have some commercial element to it. I think they're just not really in favour of authorities just doing things purely for income. It has to have a wider objective.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we won't be buying any casinos then? Or... Thank you very much. Any other questions? I did mention, well, you're going to be passing this along to the cabinet member with the corrections. I did mention 2.4, that didn't read quite. You'll look at that. Okay, thank you. The property fund has been, I say, released. I don't know what the expression would be. It's now available to be sold or invested in, which is which is good. Just going back to SIPFA, we were talking about, I think we're all aware of that we can't, as you just said, can't borrow to invest primarily for financial return. But it goes on to suggest here it's not prudent for authorities to make any investment or spending decision that may lead to new borrowing unless directly or primarily related to the functions of the authority. So I think that's quite important as well, as a sort of bookend to the other one. But it is reducing our or any authority's ability to borrow for investment. I don't have any further points. If I can ask the monitoring officer, do we need to vote on this one?
Indeed, Chairman, because you have a recommendation for this document to be submitted to full council. Obviously, you've asked Phil to make some amendments to the reports before it's put forward, but of course, Chairman, you do need to seek a proposer and a seconder and put the matter to the vote. Thank you.
So, we're going to recommend, if members are in agreement, we recommend submission to the full
Move
council.
the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mann?
Chairman, you still need to put the matter to the vote, please.
I've done it wrong again.
You've just paused that after causing your seconder, so you just need to proceed to put to the vote. Thank you.
Right. Can I have approval? Thank you very much, members. We reach the final paper, the Monitoring Officer's Annual Report, which I'm assuming Emma Wisby will be presenting.
I am, Chairman, thank you. Kim Cole does extend her apologies for this evening. Unfortunately, she's not able to be with you this evening, but I am her appointed Deputy Monitoring Officer, and I've supported Kim in producing this report for members this evening. So, members, this report is for noting this evening, and the Monitoring Officer is the proper officer for discharging the Council's functions under the Localism Act for assessment and determination of complaints made under the Code of Conduct for district and parish councils. This report is a summary of the activities which the Monitoring Officer has taken in 2021, and we seek to give an outline of the work that we've undertaken. As this committee is actually part of our governance arrangements for Code of Conduct and Ethical Standards, some of this information will be well known to yourselves. So, the substantive part of work that we undertook in 2021 was a comprehensive review of the Council's constitution. This was carried out with work with the Developing Democracy Group, which is a cross-party working group. They looked at the Constitution together with this committee before making recommendations for the new Constitution for its approval at the Council's AGM on April 2021. I'm pleased to say that that piece of work was successfully undertaken, and we now work to that Constitution. The Monitoring Officer is planning some training sessions for all members to make sure that the Constitution is embedded in all members and officers' knowledge, to make it part of the culture of the council, so members have greater awareness of not only the rules that govern how we conduct meetings, but also the rules which govern our other processes which have been touched upon this evening. We don't have a schedule of dates for those training sessions. Unfortunately, as with many services of the council, we've had to sort of delay some of our process, but it's something that we are looking to achieve by the end of this civic year. So another piece of work we undertook was to appoint independent persons. Now, under the Localism Act, we are legally required to have independent persons to help to discharge the standards process. At full council, we did appoint 2 independent persons, 1 main and a reserve, and that is Mary Bell and Layla Crow. And I'm pleased to inform members that we have had several meetings with both those ladies to date, and we have set down a schedule of meetings to meet them on a routine basis. One of that is just to keep them aware of matters that are in local government and maybe featuring within our own authority. Because they are independent persons, they're not elected members, they are members of the public who've been selected through a interview process, so they don't necessarily have strong links with local government, so that's why we are having sets of meetings, and also to bolster relationships between the monitoring officer and the IPs. So if I just move on to the complaint side of the standards regime, just to remind members that the monitoring officer is the proper officer for the code of conduct and complaints for town and parish councils and district councils. So that gives us approximately 420 councillors in total for the Braintree district, which we support, assist and may have to advise. Now, in accordance with our legal obligations, we do have arrangements in place to assess complaints that are made to the monitoring officer, and all that details is published on the council's website and is accessible to everybody. Now, in terms of complaints, we've got a few categories of complaint, but one of the issues of complaints which we cannot investigate is any allegation that a member has failed to comply with its disclosable pecuniary interests, or a DPI as we know them to be. Under the Localism Act, any matter involving the DPI automatically become a criminal matter, so therefore any complaints which are referred to the monitoring officer that a member has alleged to breach their DPI, we refer those to Essex Police, but I'm pleased to inform members this evening that we've had no such complaints made in the last civic year. We have had a number of formal complaints which have been made to the monitoring officer, and the theme of those complaints are around the appropriate conduct of individual members in meetings or their conduct on social media. Social media has been a theme of complaints that's been on the increase over the last few years, as it's obviously increased in popularity and become part of main life and means of communication. We have rejected some complaints which have been put forward to the monitoring officer. Largely, these were complaints that did not relate to the code of conduct, so didn't come under the remit of the monitoring officer. Unfortunately, there are circumstances where we do receive complaints because somebody is aggrieved by the behaviours of a councillor, but obviously if it's not in a councillor's capacity, it's not something that we can look at. And also, if somebody's aggrieved by a decision of the authority or parish council, again, that's a complaint that we cannot look at under our processes. We've had complaints which have naturally fell away because the councillors have resigned from office. So once a member has resigned, then unfortunately any ability for us to carry on with a complaint ceases, because we can only deal with a member who's in office. And we've also rejected complaints which have been motivated by malice or tit for tat, and we are able to do that under our assessment criteria. We have one complaint that's been withdrawn by the complainant, and we've had 2 complaints resolved by informal dispute resolution processes. We do have 2 historic code of conduct complaints which the monitoring officer has prioritised for processing, and they will then they'll go through their process shortly. Unfortunately, members, I cannot give you the details of the complaints that have been considered by the monitoring officer until we reach a part of the process where we move into the public domain. All complaints made to the monitoring officer are confidential. Because we've had no complaints that have gone through the complaints process, we've had to make no referrals to the Standards Subcommittee. So therefore, whilst members may be disappointed that we've not had to activate our committee because we do have members appointed to it, we do consider that's a very good thing, because it does show that in terms of the member conduct that comes under the remit of the monitoring officer, that whilst we are aware there are issues, that the complaints that have come before us are not matters which are so significant that has warranted investigation to date. Another large piece of work that we have started and will probably take the range of this civic year is the Code of Conduct. Now, members, you'll be aware that the LGA produced a model Code of Conduct in December of last year, and that was consulted upon and had some revisions made in January 2021. That Code of Conduct is a document that we will be considering going forward. But we couldn't do it until now because we were waiting for guidance from the LGA as to the intentions of their code, because their code brought in some matters which historically we've not seen in previous versions of codes, whether it's been ours, which we developed ourselves, or through the historic statutory code. So we did require to receive that guidance before moving forward, and we're not alone in that. Kim and I do sit on special interest groups of monitoring officers, and that's been quite a large area of debate, and we are in a similar position to a number of authorities in Essex in terms of its current examination of the LGA code. When we go through the formal process, we will be engaging this committee together with DGG, the Developing Democracy Group. Our process is to have that first conversation with DGG, and then we have the conversation with this committee. And part of the review would be looking with yourselves as to the appropriateness of any modifications to the code, or whether we do adopt the LGA code as drafted, and then it will be a recommendation to full council in due course. Our timescales for delivering that is that we hope to have a new code in place for the new civic year. An area that we also work with is dispensations against interest to enable members to participate in matters where they may have an interest, which in normal circumstances would mean they couldn't. For this year, that we've had no requests made, and they are dispensation requests not only from district councillors but also parish councils. And the last piece of work to report on is registers of interest. Now, every member has a legal obligation to have a register of interest and to keep that under review and report any changes within 28 days to the monitoring officer. I can advise that we've got no issues with the district council councillors' registers of interest. And in terms of the register of interest from the town and parish councils, we've been working with the clerks to make sure that we have all the registers up to date and are correct. But ultimately, it is the responsibility for councillors to make sure that the registers are up to date. But where we do become aware that there has been a change, we try to work proactively to encourage members to review their registers and to let us know what those changes are. So that's a very quick canter through the report, Chairman, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Chairman. Something came up in the meetings that we had following the atrocities with Councillor MP David Amis, speaking with the police body that spoke to us about members' details being on the website, and it was going to be looked at whether those things. Has there been anything further since?
Okay, so that actually falls outside the annual report to this committee, but I can advise that Kim has been working with that, because we can't do it in isolation, because members' information is in the public domain through a number of sources. And what we are looking at is we have some double-hatted and triple-hatted members, and if one authority takes a position where it's declining to obscure certain information and then it's published by another, then we do have some tensions. But it is something that Kim is looking at and will be advising members in due course. Thank you.
Members, any other points you'd like to raise? Thank you very much, Emma. Can I just say, because I was one of the people who perhaps misguidedly volunteered to be involved with the Constitution update, and I think you and your colleagues have done a great job. It was huge. I mean, who knew there were so many pages? But no, it was a great piece of work, and congratulations. So now all we have to do is follow
That's
it and
just the
understand
motion,
it.
thank
That's
you,
right.
Chairman.
Well, it's another day's work. So, members, I think that brings us to the end of a meeting, and I will close it at 8:44. Thank you very much.